Hello, this is Tony Hiller from RealClimateScience.com. The always reliable Guardian newspaper says summer Arctic sea ice has shrunk by 13% a decade since satellite records began in 1979. They say that Arctic sea ice is doomed and that the first ice-free summer could be in the 2030s, a decade earlier than previous projections. 10 years ago, The Guardian said that the Arctic would be ice-free by the year 2015, so apparently they believe the year 2030 is decades before the year 2015. Guardian mathematics is almost as bad as their science. In 2004, The Guardian said that Britain would have a Siberian climate by the year 2020, and in the year 2012 they announced that Britain was in a permanent drought. These forecasts of imminent Arctic doom have been made over and over again over the last few decades. Nobel laureate Al Gore and White House climate envoy John Kerry both predicted the Arctic would be ice-free by the year 2014.
You have sea ice, which is melting at a rate that the Arctic Ocean now increasingly is exposed. In 5 years, scientists predict we will have the first ice-free Arctic summer.
Another new study to be presented by U.S. Navy researchers later this week warns it could happen in as little as 7 years. 7 years from now. In the last few months, it has been harder and harder to misinterpret the signs that our world is spinning out of kilter.
But there's more Arctic sea ice now than there was when Al Gore made that forecast more than 15 years ago. There's been no trend in the Arctic summer minimum over the past 15 years. And Arctic sea ice extent is slightly higher now than it was on the same date in 1995. In 2008, Norway's leading Arctic expert predicted that the Arctic would be ice-free that summer. Canada's leading expert and National Geographic predicted the North Pole would be ice-free during the summer of 2008. During the summer of 2008, British swimmer Lewis Pugh listened to the scientists and made a decision to kayak to the North Pole. He didn't make it very far on his 1,200-kilometer journey because his route was blocked by ice. A leading Canadian researcher predicted the Arctic would be ice-free as soon as 2010 or 2015. NASA's leading Arctic expert predicted the Arctic would be ice-free by the year 2012. And Mark Cerise of the National Snow and Ice Data Center said, "The Arctic is screaming." The BBC said Arctic summers would be ice-free by the year 2013. NASA's leading climate expert who started the global warming scare before Congress in 1988 predicted the Arctic would be ice-free between 2013 and 2018. And Democrats in Congress said, "Dr. Hansen was right. We recognize him as a climate prophet." The Sierra Club confidently predicted that Arctic sea ice will vanish in the year 2013. The U.S. Navy and NASA generated this graph showing Arctic sea ice disappearing during the summer of 2014. And Barack Obama's science advisor John Holdren predicted the ice would not only disappear during summer, but it would also disappear during winter as well. In 1958, the New York Times reported that Arctic sea ice was only about 7 feet thick, and they predicted that the ice would be gone during the lifetime of their children. But the ice is still there, and it's still about 2 meters or 7 feet thick. In yesterday's article, The Guardian said, the first ice-free summer could be in the 2030s, a decade earlier than previous projections. The Guardian is hoping that their readers will believe their current disinformation and have forgotten about their previous disinformation. This is a screenshot from National Geographic in November 1976. We live in an unusual epoch. Today, the polar regions have large ice caps, whereas during most of the Earth's history, the poles have been ice-free. That was a quote from the National Academy of Sciences in 1975. The most recent time when the Arctic may have been ice-free was around 7,000 to 4,000 years ago. July temperatures along the northern coastline of Russia may have been 2.5 to 7 degrees Celsius warmer than modern. 5,000 years ago, trees grew all the way to the edge of the Arctic Ocean in Canada, whereas now the tree line is 80 to 100 kilometers further south. 5,000 years ago, the Arctic was much warmer and may have been ice-free. Polar bears didn't die off and civilization didn't collapse. In fact, civilization thrived. That's when Stonehenge and the Great Pyramids of Egypt were built. Carbon dioxide levels were much lower, yet the Arctic was much warmer. This article from The Guardian is their usual climate scam. It's chock full of misinformation which has nothing to do with reality. I'm going to finish the video up with a look at this claim. Summer Arctic ice has shrunk by 13% a decade since satellite records began in 1979. I've already shown that there's been no trend in the Arctic summer minimum over the past 15 years. But the real fraud is that they're hiding inconvenient data. This is from the 1990 report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. The 1990 report stated, satellite observations have been used to map sea ice extent routinely since the early 1970s. In 1972 to 1975, sea ice extent was significantly less. They've hidden all of this inconvenient data prior to the peak year of 1979. 1979 was the coldest year on record in Iceland. By hiding all the data before 1979, they can create a fake correlation with increasing carbon dioxide. But the climate of the Arctic is cyclical, not linear. The 1940s were very warm in the eastern Arctic. In 1939, all of the glaciers in eastern Greenland were rapidly melting. It may without exaggeration be said that the glaciers of Greenland, like those in Norway, face the possibility of a catastrophic collapse. It's pretty obvious why climate alarmists are trying to hide the data before the record cold year of 1979. They claim there's no satellite sea ice data prior to 1979, but the November 1976 issue of National Geographic had this very detailed satellite image of sea ice around Antarctica, and as you can see, there was almost none in January 1976. It is utterly ridiculous to pretend that we don't have satellite imagery prior to 1979. This was a photograph taken from Apollo 11 in 1969. The Guardian, which has taken $13 million from Bill Gates to push this sort of nonsense, is hoping that the readers aren't very intelligent. And the fact that the readers are still reading and believing their climate scam shows that they may well be correct in that assumption. Toto has been pulling back the curtain on the climate scam for the past 15 years. You can visit him, Kyrie Caesar, Toki Upla, and the 4 new puppies on the web at realclimatescience.com.